Why is a small roster good for Bleach Rebirth of Souls? So there's been a lot of discussions going on with Bleach Rebirth of Souls nowadays. I mean, the game is popping off like crazy in terms of trailers and gameplay videos. But I want to speak specifically about the roster of this game, because there's been a lot of discussions of people talking about the size of it, of how small it will very likely be in comparison to other games in the same genre, or in the anime fighter spectrum, as you could say. The thing about that is people don't really realize that sometimes actually a small roster is a great thing for fighting games. And I want to go into a couple of things on why this is. There's a certain belief that the bigger the roster, the better, but that's not always the case. Now, I want to tackle certain points about this topic on why I believe this is a good thing. First of all, it creates a more balanced game. The more there are characters in a fighting game, the more difficult it becomes to balance it as well. Small roster creates opportunities for tackling each character individually and sort of testing them from one character to another. I'm sure through playtests it goes through that a lot, but when the bigger the roster is, playtesting through individual characters one by one, it won't really show exactly how the matchup goes from one character to another when they go up against each other. So that's where you need to realize it's actually sometimes a very great thing in this regard. Now, let me give you an example of what I mean. In my case, I actually come from Smash Brothers. And Smash Brothers is something that I dwelled a lot into the competitive scene. I played a lot of Smash Ultimate. I played a lot of the previous like mods as well, to like Project M and this and that, but never dwelled like competitively, but learned a lot of the advanced techniques and whatnot. I would say I'm a little qualified to talk about this to some extent. I have some idea in this regard in terms of that experience. So I'm going to tackle about just Smash in general. In this regard, I'm specifically talking about tier list. Now, obviously, tier list isn't everything in this regard. It's not the end all and be all of what character balance is all about, but it gives you still a solid foundation on where characters are in terms of their strengths and weaknesses. Now, this is, for example, Smash Ultimate tier list that came out recently, actually. Now, this is not the most accurate thing ever, because ultimately Smash Ultimate it's not the most balanced game ever, and not at all, in fact, especially compared to other fighting games nowadays. It's massively disbalanced, and this tier list kind of shows in comparison to that too, that as you can see, there's S tier all the way down to D- tiers, and this is a game where there's balances and that sort. Updates and patches were coming out through all the years, and at the end of the day, this is what the result of it was, right? Part of it is the fact that there is a big roster. Besides, balancing choices is not the best, but a large roster has a lot to do with it too, with the fact that this patch is on top of that. They know the weaknesses of these characters, and this is still what it looks like. Now, look at the first Smash game that came out in 1999, if I'm not mistaken. Now, much smaller roster, only 12, and only 4 letters. Mind you that there is 0 patches in this game. 0. This is like one version of the game after all these years, without a single patch or anything like that. And it's a more balanced game than Smash Ultimate. How crazy is that? It has to do with the fact that it contains a very small roster. It doesn't even go to D, while the Ultimate went all the way to D-. This is C at worst, So it shows that small roster it creates this balance between each individual characters that make it a lot easier for them to interact with one another. In Bleach Rebirth of Souls, it's not like it's going to be a 12 character roster. I doubt it. I'm assuming it's going to be around like the 30 to 35 character roster, pretty much mostly like all the characters from the story mode, from the beginning of the story to the end of the Ironclar arc. So expect that kind of number. But there's some people who thought that that's a very disappointing number, which is a shame, because a lot of comparison comes from Sparking Zero, which has a lot more, you know, characters, obviously. But people need to understand that the Sparking Zero, it's a very different game compared to Rebirth of Souls. One thing you need to understand, that the fact that every character is very, very specific in terms of the way they want to create it. It's not where Sparking Zero, you can just pick up, I don't know, Topo or Vegeta or, I don't know, Piccolo, and you can kind of play the same character the same way. You know what I mean? If you pick up Ichigo in this game and then you go to Aizen, you cannot interchange in terms of the style of gameplay that you're going to use with these characters. That's what it seems like from what we've seen so far with the gameplays and everything, and what people from the demo at Jump Festa, when they played it, seems to have that opinion too, which is a lot of grinding that needs to be done with each individual characters on their own. So that's my other point. It creates the fact that there's a lot of unique character specific gameplay. So that's good. A small roster creates that opportunity. I'm very grateful that that's the case, that that's the kind of game they want to focus on, make every character as unique as possible from one another, and not interject that sort of, you know, gameplay loop. So I'm glad that they are going through that route. And another thing is also in the competitive scene, there's a huge problem, for example, in Smash Ultimate. In Smash Ultimate, there's a situation where there's just so many characters in the game, and maybe there's also another thing where partially the problem is a lot of the characters that you see might be like that are like C- or who knows, D or whatever it might be. It has to do with lack of representation. Proper representation creates this problem as well in terms of how good a character is. The thing is, I'm sure in this game, in Smash Ultimate, there are characters that are just, that have the potential to be absolutely an A tier and S tier, but they just don't get that chance because nobody actually plays them. And why won't they play them? Because there's just so many other characters that it becomes overwhelming, in the sense that people would rather play that or this character or that character. So with a small roster, what happens is everyone has a chance to be represented from a certain player and whatnot. There's going to be, you know, many players who are going to play, you know, Link or Luigi, like in this situation, right? Or masters of every single character. It's not just like one specific person or Zero that's playing that character as a representative. There's going to be many people playing all of these characters. That's the thing. So with Rebirth of Souls, I'm assuming there's going to be, you know, popular characters as you expect. There's going to be a lot of, for example, Aizen, Ulquiorra, probably super popular character, this and that. They're going to be very represented as like the more popular characters as they are. But I'm thinking about less popular characters, or even like low tiers, you could say, in the game that would be there. Because of the size of the roster and the player base of a certain size, the likelihood of all of the characters being represented at a good quantity is going to be a decent chance at that, you know? And I like to see that. I like to see all of the characters being represented as much as they need to, you know? Hopefully that's what the case will be, but this gives a very strong chance, and this is why a huge roster sometimes is not a great thing for that reason. So the meta of each character would be very developed and developed and developed. That's another very important thing that I want to mention. The more each individual character is played many times, as much as, you know, as the meta needs to, it's going to keep developing, and the meta of all of those characters will be at a certain point, you know. So I think about Amsa, a Yoshi player that plays Super Smash Bros. Melee. Probably the only huge Yoshi representative, but there's a few others too that exist that sort of want to catch up to something like Amsa or Surpass. But he's a good example of somebody who developed the meta for Yoshi so much, so hard, and did a great job at that, you know. But Melee is also a very small game, similar to something like this first Smash game, right? But you don't really see that in Smash Ultimate. There's just not a chance for something like that to happen because the roster is just so big. So that's the point I'm trying to make. Now, will the roster get big over time? Yes, it will. Of course it will. That's just the nature of fighting games nowadays, right? But it'll be a slow and gradual progression to a bigger roster through the expansion pass, and you know, that's mostly how it's going to get bigger. But I think that's a good route to take. I think every character needs to get a chance at this game to be represented in every way possible, create a more balanced game, and hopefully it creates an environment that is extremely fun. Anyways, hope you guys enjoyed and stick around for more videos. See ya.